Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get started here. Let me unmute you.
Hey.
Is it working? Okay, cool. I'll go ahead and get started real quick. So, hey everybody, welcome to Louisville Makes Games, our speaker series that we've been doing for 2 weeks now. We're going to be doing, or try to do a speaker each month, and today we have Kyle Pulver. So it's pretty exciting for me because I've been looking at Kyle Pulver's stuff online for several years now, and Kyle, you were also like the inspiration for me to get into game jams because I saw that you did a lot of game jams, and I was like, what's a game jam? So I looked up how to do one and started a global game jam here, and that's how I met a bunch of friends, and that's how basically our game dev group got started. So you were partially responsible for the game dev scene in Louisville, so that's kind of cool.
Oh my god.
So, so yeah, a little bit about let me switch the camera over really quick. A little bit about Louisville Makes Games and Warp Zone. We've been doing game jams and meetups and stuff for 2 years now, and recently we started a game dev space, and so we have our own space now, and it's about 1,400 square feet in downtown Louisville, Kentucky, and we all pay every month to use the space, and we have co-working, so people can pay to have a space here and use it as their office and also receive mail and all that. But all of our events, we do all the Ludum Dare game jams, we do global game jams, we do a ton of different events, and we're starting to pick up and do more. And so one of the new things that we're doing is the industry talks. And so thanks for joining us with that. And yeah, I guess I can go ahead and let you take over from here, and then we'll come back and I'll turn the mic back on when it comes around to question time, and we also might have some questions from people watching online.
Sure.
Let me go ahead and switch to your screen. And thanks, and here's Kyle Pulver.
Thank you for that amazing introduction. Okay, I'm going to try to hop over to... Am I like all big now on your side? Is it okay? And you're muted. Perfect. Okay, I'm gonna try to switch over to my desktop. Okay. Let's see how much stuff I can break. So I'm gonna start with 2 notes. One is that the Google Hangout stuff might be a little bit choppy. So at the end of all this, I'm going to release all the slides and all the video footage that I'm going to use on the internet, so you can see it in full 60 FPS glory. And my other note is that I somehow just hid my taskbar in Windows permanently. So we're going to see how this goes. So hey, I'm Kyle Pulver. I'm some kind of video game developer person. I make games under the name Kpulv. I made a couple of games that you might have heard of. One is called Snapshot. Came out on Steam way back in the year 2012. And then I also released a game called Offspring Fling in the same year on Steam. Those are probably the 2 games that people may have heard of from me. I've made a bunch of other games, but yeah, nobody knows those. Anyway, I make a open source 2D game making framework called Otter. It's available on otter2d.com. So this talk is going to be something. It's going to be about something I really care about in games, which is explosions. So we're going to call it Exploring Explosions and Other Thoughts. So number 1 goal is talk about explosions. I want to try to share my process. I usually get a lot of feedback, more in my recent games, about my particle effects and stuff, and so I kind of want to try to unravel my workflow for creating explosions and all that kind of stuff. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll be able to add maybe some of these techniques to your own personal bag of tricks when you're making your own games. So explosions. What is an explosion? it's a sudden release of energy from usually from like a single point, and that's kind of like the whole idea that I follow when I'm making my explosions. And explosions are a subset of particle effects in general, and they can be used for a lot of things in games. But the focus for this talk is going to be explosions that are all about destruction, because they're the most fun to make, I think. So I'm going to be talking about a game that I'm working on right now called Super Sky Sisters. I'm going to show some footage of it. Hopefully it's like kind of okay frame rate wise. I'm going to not full screen VLC because it blows up. So Super Sky Sisters is a 2-player co-op game, and it's a very hectic arcade action survival kind of thing, where you're trying to protect this orb thing between the 2 players. You're connected by a chain. You can only fire your weapon away from the other player, so when you move, you're actually affecting where the other player's aiming. This footage is me playing solo mode, so I'm controlling both players with one controller. So it's a little bit... It looks a little bit different when 2 different people are playing each character. But the game just kind of sends these waves and waves of stuff at you until you either die or you make it all the way to the end, where you can choose to end the game and double your score, or you can keep going for another round to see how far you can push yourself. So as you can see, the game has a lot of explosions. And I spend a lot of time on them. I spend a lot of time on making all the explosions and stuff, and I'm trying to figure out why. So this talk is kind of also like self-reflective in a way, because I have a lot of nebulous thoughts about explosions that I'm trying to work out into something that I can easily explain to other people. I think explosions are a very effective form of communication in games. You can tell a lot to a player about what's going on with an appropriate particle effect or explosion. And cool explosions can make players' actions feel way more satisfying. And so satisfying is kind of this word that it's kind of hard to define, I think. It's kind of nebulous in its meaning. So I'm going to try to explore that real quick. So explosions can be used in a number of ways. I don't know how choppy this is, but anyway. In Sky Sisters, when you collect points, there's little tiny explosions on the orb. Little sparkles and circle bursts and all that kind of stuff. So you can use explosions for collecting something. You can use it for firing a weapon. Every time you fire your weapon, there's a little explosion particle and shockwave. Some examples from other games, Kirby. Whenever you get a power, this is Kirby Superstar. There's like a crazy particle effect, and like this effect is amazing. It's like it darkens the screen. Like there's crazy particle effects. It freezes gameplay. So good. Defeating an enemy. We're going to be focusing on this one quite a bit in this talk. Whenever you defeat an enemy, there's a big explosion. There's like a cluster of enemies right there, so they all blow up, and it's really cool looking. Clearing a level. Way back in the day, everyone got when you play Super Mario, you got some fireworks if you like satisfy that score and time condition, I think. And explosions can be a really significant way to telegraph that the player is taking damage. So in this example, the orb is taking some hits from some bullets, and there's a little like spark explosion effect, and it freezes the gameplay and all that kind of stuff. So let's talk about the enemy explosion real quick, and we're still on the topic of like satisfaction, like making something satisfying. So you defeated an enemy, that's awesome. So the explosion, the giant explosion, is part of the reward. It's like it's like this visual stimulus for a job well done in a way, right? Like you accomplish the task of defeating an enemy before it killed you and your partner in Super Sky Sisters, that kind of stuff. And a cool visual can really bolster the sense of accomplishment. So in that sense, I think satisfaction, in a way, can mean when you react to a player's action, you are meeting or exceeding the player's expectations. And visually, you can see that here. Like, so if an enemy doesn't explode, it just vanishes. It's kind of just like, well, what happened? Did it? It's just gone. There's no satisfying like pop or anything like that. But when you add crazy explosions, every enemy kill can have way more impact. Okay, so I'm going to talk about significance first. So basically, the whole idea is we're going to go through a little bit of covering some various topics, and then I'm going to break down one of the explosions from the game, kind of step by step. So having a big explosion isn't always super appropriate. You want to scale your explosions in regards to their significance. So in Sky Sisters, we have these little tiny enemies that just ram you, and when they ram you, they actually just explode with little tiny, like 5 or 6 particle bursts. And then, other than that, there's like all these like spikes and stuff that are from the damage. So, going through like the events of the game that have crazy explosions, we have the player failure, which is like when the orb loses all of its health. Oops, go back PowerPoint. Okay. And this happens only once every playthrough, so I can go a little bit crazy with it. When the player's orb health reaches 0, the screen darkens to black, all these spark effects come flying in, and then there's a big explosion outward of these like 4 blue particle snake things spiraling outward. So another significant event is the boss dying, like a big enemy. I'm going to talk more about this later, but it happens maybe once to 3 times per playthrough, so I can also get a little bit crazy with that one. There are bombs in the game that hurt you, and when those blow up, they have like a pretty big explosion because it doesn't happen very often, and it's also dangerous to the player, so they can be a little bit bigger than the average explosion in the game. Defeating an enemy, that happens maybe 50 to 100 times per playthrough, so it can be like medium size, I guess, if you call that a medium size explosion for me, I think. And then we have the tiny ramming guys, which happens all the time depending on like the enemy spawns. Like there's an enemy that will spawn a bunch of these dudes and they all fly at you, so they come in clusters. So when a big wave of them collides with you, there's lots of explosions, so they're small. So overall, the less significant the event, the smaller the explosion. So I'm going to talk about some of these significant events like the game over explosion. Having a cool explosion hooked into a negative scenario in the game can help make that game over or failure scenario more fun. It's like, oh, the players, they lost, but they still get this super epic explosion. And I've seen that help a lot in people playing the game. But this comes with a warning. Don't do this if your game involves dying a lot. Restart time is a pretty sensitive dial in games. If it's too high, you risk losing players. After they die, they might just quit the game instead of trying again. So if your game is like, if your game has a lot of like rapid retrying of stuff, like you're trying to beat a level over and over again, then having a crazy epic explosion whenever you die is probably not the best idea. But in Super Sky Sisters, player death is extremely significant. It usually happens maybe after 5 or 10 or maybe 15 minutes of gameplay time. So it's kind of like a ratio. So like the longer the playtime before the death, then the more significant your death animation can be. For boss explosions, another super significant thing, it's defeating a major foe, so you can go absolutely crazy with it. And we will talk about that at the end. So overall, it's all about giving your players' actions more impact, and you want to make them feel cool as heck all the time, if possible, even sometimes when they're messing up. So with that, we'll step into an explosion from Super Sky Sisters. We'll try to dissect it down to every single art asset that goes into it. And we'll be talking about the enemy explosion. So all of my explosions are built from smaller assets. I like to basically construct like a palette of different particles that I can kind of construct in my game framework to build explosions. This allows for more variance in the game. Like I can randomize certain aspects of the explosion to make no two explosions look the same. And this allows for maximum flexibility. I can reuse assets and different explosions and scale them and do different things with them to make different effects. So basically, I take assets that look like this, and I turn it into something that looks like this, just see how choppy that is. That looks okay. I'm going to step through it frame by frame in a moment, so we should be okay. So this is the overall intensity curve, I think, of the explosion. And intensity is kind of hard to describe, but I think it's kind of something like, when you see it, you can tell how intense an explosion is by looking at it. And hopefully stepping into each individual aspect of the explosion will shed some light on that. So I'm going to load up a video real quick and also drink water. Heads up, I spilled some water all over myself. It's okay. We're going to keep going. You can't see me. Okay. VLC, please. Okay. Okay. Okay, so the first two frames are going to be this black and white this black and white circle flash, and then followed by the I guess the start of the core of the explosion. It's spawning some particles. There's a core particle in the center, some surrounding particles around the outside. There's these like God ray action beams, like light strands or something, that are kind of scattered around the outside. As we keep going, more action lines come in, or action beams. You can also see some tiny little explosions being scattered throughout the the overall radius of the explosion. You can also see that there's like this shockwave now coming out. There's actually like a couple of them layered on top of each other, and there's even more particles added to the outer ring. So as we step forward, the shockwave keeps going out. Below all this, there's also a glow underneath the whole thing that kind of tints the area around it towards the color of the explosion. And you can see the particles start to animate. The core particle goes to a frame. It's like kind of like these spikes coming out of the center, kind of drive home the whole like energy escaping from a point idea. The particles around the outside begin to animate. The action lines are kind of fading away over time. The shockwave is fading away. Core particle keeps going. On the outside, it's flying outward. You can see more of these random scattered explosions, like the smaller ones, happening towards the center. As we step through the rest of it, it kind of just slowly fades away. The core particle is still there. You can see the glow sort of fading away. That's the very last step. And then we get to this last frame here, with just a little bit, couple of specks of smoke left from the whole shebang. So hopefully you kind of can observe that curve of intensity through that whole thing, like the black and white flash through like the initial burst of the explosion with all the bright light and all that kind of stuff, then it fades away over time. So in chronological order, I think we're going to step through the different assets. So the black and white flash, this is a trick I saw from Metal Slug. A lot of the explosions in Metal Slug start with this black and white flash, like a perfect circle flash. And it's kind of like the initial spark of the energy that's being released. And the black to white transition makes the white seem so much brighter. And this happens in just 2 frames, so 60 frames per second. That's super fast, right? That's like 30-something milliseconds. But it actually does make a pretty big difference, I think. So then this is the core particle of the explosion. It has a lot of frames of animation. It has a lot of color to each frame. There's like one frame where it has 3 shades. It's the center of the explosion. It has the most frames of animation, highest detail, the color range per frame, but it's in grayscale. But the explosion you just saw was in color. So let's take a quick tangent to just cover that real quick to make sure everyone's on the same page. So in a lot of my games, I now use shaders, because shaders are super cool. So one of the cool things about shaders is you can use a fragment shader to sort of dynamically recolor an asset in the game. So for particles, this is super useful, because that means I can take a black and white image like the sprite sheet on the upper left and apply a gradient map, the thing on the bottom right, to make a particle that looks like this. So it just maps black to white to these colors. So on the left side of the gradient map, black becomes like that dark purple, and then white becomes like the yellowish white, and then everything in between maps to the appropriate color, like the purple, the red, and yellow. So I end up with this. And so you gotta shuffle some windows real quick. So this allows for cool stuff, like I can reuse the same particle for different effects. Like I can make this a blue particle instead. And having a different color on an explosion particle can provide a whole different context. So in this little animation, it's like a treasure chest that explodes. And so it's like this blue explosion, and it's like, to me, like a red fiery explosion. It's like, it implies like, you know, like it's this hot, fiery, violent thing. Whereas a blue to white explosion, it seems more magical and cool and friendly in a way. So the treasure chest explodes with kind of like this blue explosion that kind of spawns all this loot that the player can pick up. Anyway, back to the core particle here. We're going to move on to the... Oh wait, no, actually before that, the core particle's intensity curve is pretty much the overall intensity curve of the explosion. It matches it because basically that core particle is kind of like the centerpiece of the explosion. So helping out the core particle is this outer ring. Let's just real quick, I'm going to drag this guy back over. So this particle is what appears around the outside in this like circle here. So it supplements the core explosion by emphasizing the outward burst of energy. It adds more volume to the explosion. It's important to note that they're evenly distributed around the center, and they have a slightly randomized lifespan. So this brings up a quick aside, which is like when you're making an explosion or any particle effect, it's like chaos versus control. So when you do something with an even distribution, that feels way more controlled. Like not much is randomized here as far as the ring particles go. They're all evenly spaced around the outside. And this is totally up to what your goals are for your explosions. You can go either way. You can do totally random stuff, or you can do very controlled stuff. And for Super Sky Sisters, it just seemed like having a more controlled explosion made more sense for the game's art style. So overall, the outer ring particle is way simpler in animation, has less frames, it's smaller, it has a narrower color range, and the intensity is way lower. But overall, the outer ring particles have the same like time span as the core particle and the explosion overall. There's another part of the outer ring which is just like a smaller particle of these little like ring dudes here. It complements the larger outer ring. It fills the gaps. Let's drag this guy back over. You can see them. They kind of fill the space in between each of the larger ones. And they fade away a little bit quicker. This just helps to add more volume to the explosion, really. They're spaced evenly between. They have an even lower intensity because they're very small. But you know, that kind of just adds more to the volume. We have this other thing called, I'm just calling the debris pops. They're the tiny scattered explosions that are happening throughout. So you can kind of see them here. They're kind of scattered all over. And they happen super randomly. Kind of like just spawning all over. They have a pretty high variance in their scale. There's one over here on the left that's kind of large. And there's like super tiny ones you can spot all throughout here. Yep, randomized position, randomized startup. They come in and out as the explosion goes on. They're kind of like sprinkles for your explosion. It's very chaotic because of the randomized position and startup. But it gives this impression that there's like ejected debris from the explosion that's then exploding after the initial main burst. And once again, it's just adding more volume to this explosion. And this is mostly inspired by those fireworks. You know, like you see a firework that goes off, and then afterwards it has like 20 or 30 like tinier explosions that follow it up. So on the intensity over time curve, this is what I kind of think they look like. They're kind of happening throughout the explosion, and they're not very intense because they're very small. Okay, the action beams, which is what I'm just calling them for now. I had to make up names for all this stuff for this talk. It's great. They're placed at a distance further away from the center of the explosion. So they're the things that are all around this outside here. So they kind of leave a gap between the center and and where they are. And this just adds more intensity to the explosion. They have slightly varied lifespans, and they're at completely random angles. So every time an explosion like this goes off, it'll have a totally different set of action beams around it. And this just serves to draw attention along the path of the energy of the explosion. These are mostly inspired by other visual mediums like comics and like cartoons and anime and all that. Use like action lines a lot for intense moments. So this is kind of inspired by that. And I think an important part of action beams is that it makes the game look better in stills. Like it makes screenshots of the game look better if you're trying to capture an explosion in a screenshot. And screenshots are super important. It's like when you have a game, it's like you have like your trailer, your one paragraph of text, and screenshots. So it's important to ask yourself if the viewer can follow along with what's happening. And I think action beams can help tell more of a story about an explosion. But that might be super tough to pull off, and I'm not sure if it totally works. This is just like a high apple pie in the sky hope kind of thing. And here's the action beams mapped to the nice little intensity time graph. Okay, so now that's like the main stuff you see. So real quick, I'm going to cover the more subtle stuff. Actually, I don't have to go super quick. I'm looking at my time. Okay. So we have the shockwave. So this is the art asset of the shockwave. It's super simple. All it is like a circle. Like if you have Photoshop or other similar software, I think I made this just by doing like a circle selection and then an inner glow. So the center, the very center of the circle is completely transparent, and then it fades to 100% transparent as it reaches the edges. So multiple shockwaves expand from the center of the explosion. Here we are. We got. I think this explosion uses 2 shockwaves. There's an outer one and an inner one, and they just kind of fly out from the center. You can see a little bit that the outer one is like the red color of the explosion, and the inner one is the yellow color of the explosion. So yeah, they're colored with the same gradient map that the explosion uses. And it further emphasizes the release of energy from the center. They have a very, very, very short lifespan. It's part of that initial little burst of the explosion. And this is mostly inspired by, if you see like videos of crazy explosions of like Mythbusters or whatever, it's like when you can see like the visual shockwave like going through the air and stuff. So intensity over time, very quick, but pretty intense. Not the most intense thing happening, but it's pretty far up there. The underglow is an asset that looks just like this. It's the opposite of the shockwave, pretty much. The outside is completely transparent. The center is totally opaque. It's colored by the gradient map palette that colors the explosion. It's placed underneath almost all the particles, and it fades away very slowly over time. And it helps bring just like, I guess I call it like heat to the area of the explosion. Like you can kind of see on this blue background. You can see it like towards the center, and it sort of fades the area towards red, and it slowly fades away over time. And another cool thing is that when you do this kind of thing in the game, it'll give a subtle hint of the explosion's core colors to nearby sprites. So like all the stuff in the background or like other enemies that are nearby, that kind of stuff, they'll all kind of get a little bit of the explosion's color. So not that intense. It's really in the background, but it lasts through the entire duration of the explosion. The last step of the super subtle stuff is the screen flash. I'm going to bring this guy over again. You can see it just a tiny bit. It's incredibly subtle, actually. We can see how blue the background is now, and then when the explosion goes off, it's tinted a little bit towards the brightest red of the explosion. And that's just like a rectangle the size of the screen that appears and then quickly vanishes over time. I think it's about 15 frames for that explosion at 60 frames per second. So yeah, it fades away quickly, and this also just adds to the overall heat of the explosion. It'll make everything on the screen be drawn more towards the color of the explosion. So I put that maybe halfway up the intensity scale, but it's super quick. So yeah, all that all that work goes into just 1 second of stuff. This explosion is, I think, just under 1 second long. So yeah, that's a lot of stuff. You can see all the graphs overlaid, and then the master curve is kind of the more opaque one. Okay, so I'm just going to contrast that to the bomb explosion real quick because there are some minor differences that are worth noting. Once I rearrange all my windows on my screen. Okay, let's do this guy frame by frame for a little bit. So this one actually totally skips the whole black to white flash. And that's mostly because this explosion can damage the player. So I want to sort of broadcast the damage area of the explosion as quickly as possible. So on the very first frame, you can see that they're the outer ring of the particles. This outer ring actually matches the damage radius of the explosion. So if the players are inside this super bright red area surrounded by these particles, they'll take the damage from the bomb. I got less action lines, I think, for this one. Yeah. And then we have the core particle in the center, shockwaves coming out. One thing to note here is that one of the outer ring particles is actually this cross shape instead of just a circle. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a second. It's just going to step through. So here, actually, a couple of frames in, I actually spawn more particles, and these are all core particles. And they spawn out in a ring sort of slightly far, or a little bit far away from the center. And this just adds way more volume to this explosion. I want this one to be more noticeable than the enemy explosion. And underneath this explosion, you might notice that there's another layer of particles that wasn't in the enemy explosion, and that is the smoke. So when the bomb explodes, it actually leaves this cloud of smoke behind. And this is just sort of a thing I do to add more, I guess, significance to this explosion, since the bomb explosions happen less often. It's underneath all the other particles. And it sort of leaves an impression or a memory of where the explosion happened. It's just a simple way to give this explosion just a little bit more impact. And you can see that I won't step through all the frames of the smoke, but it lingers for a pretty long time. So it's bigger, it has more core particles. Here's the outer ring cross particle. I use this particle in the bomb explosion because it feels a little bit sharper than the enemy explosion. When you rotate the cross particle, it looks very different. So the variance kind of increases. And it just adds a little bit more chaos to the bomb explosion. The smoke particles are actually this particle, just with a different gradient map palette applied to it. This adds more volume, lingering memory of the explosion. So the more intense the explosion, the more of a lasting impression it should leave, I think. And that brings us to the boss explosion, which I'm going to try to show, and we'll see how choppy it gets. I'm also I'll try it with sound. We'll see if sound actually works here. Let's do a little bit. So I'm just going to kill the boss with the debug key, I think. Oh, wait, no, I'm not. I'm actually going to fight him. So I should skip forward. So the boss has one more eye left to blow up. And I blow it up. It's super choppy, but anyway, you get the idea. It's a massive, huge explosion. So when a boss explodes, you have different opportunities for explosions. It's more of like a cutscene, so that means you can do things like anticipation and build up. You can also crank up the intensity because the players just kill the super huge boss. It should explode and be super duper mega satisfying. So when the core of the boss explodes, I think I can do this frame by frame too. So the core of the boss is exploding. First thing I'm going to talk about is the reverse shockwave. This is part of the anticipation. I'm just trying to step to the right frame. Okay. So here you can start to see like this really, like it's super faded, but you can start to see this shockwave actually being pulled in. This is also accompanied by a bunch of other stuff, like the entire screen is fading to red and all that kind of stuff, but I have some slides for that in a little bit. Shockwave is getting brighter. It's like being sucked in. VLC, your stuff. And it gets super bright. And the closer it gets to the center, the faster it goes. And then eventually it's just like totally consumed by this insane glow that takes over the entire thing. But it gives the impression of energy being sucked into the boss like right before it explodes. So it's like building up all this hype for this massive explosion, right? So the screen palette, the entire screen's palette is also being shifted. So like what I was talking about before, the gradient map things applied to assets. I'm actually applying the explosion gradient map to the entire screen. So it's like this explosion is going to be like so crazy intense that like it looks like the entire world is on fire, right? And it's, I don't know, this stuff is so cool to me. So it pushes up the contrast and it really can make the intensity go way past the maximum of any other explosion that we've seen so far. There's also these like smaller explosions happening as the boss like starts to lose it here. Like, I think you can probably hear it better than you can see it, but the main core of the main core piece of the boss is like exploding, and then like it's getting more and more violent, and the frequency increases over time. And also each of these explosions are ejecting like debris from the boss, like these little, I'm reusing the cross particles here. So every one of these little explosions is just like ejecting more and more debris, like chunks of the boss are being like ejected by these explosions. And then finally it all builds up to the most hype explosion ever. Like there's a glow effect, I think, applied to the whole screen here. Everything is brought to like the insane, most maximum contrast levels, and then it all fades away. And another important thing is that when this whole thing explodes, it's like the ultimate like debris ejection. It has like I don't even know, like roughly 1 billion, I would guess, of these cross particles just flying outward. Because you don't want to give the impression that the boss was just totally vaporized. I feel like that's less satisfying than seeing like like pieces of the boss just flying out into space. Let's see, make sure I didn't skip anything super important on my notes. I'm sure I went like super fast. Got some misc tips and tricks coming up. Okay, so yeah, this is like non-art related stuff you can do to help bolster the impact of your explosions. Camera shake, super important, very important stuff. You can do some different types of camera shake. There's like the randomized one or like the sine wave style. If you do random, which is what I usually do, it's more chaotic. And doing like a sine wave style feels like it's more controlled. Different styles of camera shake communicate different things. Like there's single axis camera shake. Like sometimes when there's like an earth rumbling kind of thing, some games will only shake the y axis over time. But both axes is what I usually try to do for explosions, just because it just seems more chaotic. And camera shake for explosion should be pretty quick, relatively. Like if I were to put it on that intensity versus time curve, it would be very, very close to something like the shockwave. And actually mapping it to the shockwave makes some sense, because when you watch like footage or whatever of actual explosions, like usually the camera shaking is because of the shockwave hitting the camera. Hit freeze. Hit freeze is a cool thing that I don't think enough games do anymore. I think it's very important. So it's like this concept of you freeze the gameplay to emphasize the effects. So you freeze the gameplay, but you leave the effects animating and all that kind of stuff. So in Super Sky Sisters, hit freeze happens a couple times. Whenever an enemy explodes from a player's actions, the gameplay will freeze for a moment while the explosion happens. This is to kind of serve a couple of different purposes. It makes the explosion have more weight. And also, since the explosion is kind of large, freezing the gameplay actually provides some time for the explosion to go away before gameplay resumes, so it's not overly obstructive. The gameplay also freezes when the orb takes damage. You might have seen that a little bit earlier in one of the animations from before. But whenever the orb takes damage, that's very, very important, because the orb is pretty much the whole like point of the game, right? If you don't protect the orb, you're going to lose. So whenever the orb takes damage, it's very, very important to let the players know, and freezing the gameplay can be an excellent way to do that. Sort of, it's kind of like way back in the day, like Super Mario or the original Mario Brothers, like when you took damage and shrunk down to like regular Mario, or you lost your fire flower or whatever, the gameplay freezes and shows you the animation of Mario losing his power and shrinking, just to make sure that you totally get the point. So yeah, hit freeze can add a lot of weight to various things in your game. And a very important thing is to make sure that the effects are not frozen when you do hit freeze. Like freeze the gameplay, but leave the animations going, like leave the effects going. I think Ocarina of Time, the Zelda game, I think that was the first game that did like the whole, like when you hit an enemy, it would freeze the game, but then like the particle effects would play and the sound effects would play. And I remember they did that again in Wind Waker with like the music and stuff. And I saw like on the forums of like GameFAQs or whatever, people were like, is the GameCube lagging or something? Whenever I fight an enemy, the game lags. So it's kind of like this very fickle thing. You need to do it in a way where the players don't feel like the game is broken. And I think fighting games do this insanely well. Street Fighter IV actually was like a huge inspiration for a lot of the tuning of my particle effects and like hit freezes and all that kind of stuff. If you really closely study the effects that go into like Street Fighter or like King of Fighters and all that kind of games, I think you can really learn a lot. Sound, not something I know a lot about, but I tried to do cool stuff anyway. BFXer, everybody knows that. It's pretty good. It's okay. I think it kind of, you need to take it a step further to make good explosion sounds with it. There's a software called Lab Chirp, I think that's what it's called. If not, I will correct this later. But it's another sort of NES chiptune kind of style sound generator. And I've had some pretty cool results with that software. Like all these sound effects from Sky Sisters are made in Lab Chirp. You can use Audacity for editing your sound. You can give it more bass, all that kind of stuff. For explosions, I just try to do bassy, noisy stuff, and then add to that when necessary. So in conclusion, we're almost donezo here. Using explosions for communication can be incredibly effective, especially for an action game. You can also use them to reward players for their actions. Like stuff exploding in cool ways. It's just kind of like a visual reward that can draw players in. They make your game look really cool, and recent studies have shown that people like graphics. And the era of streaming is well underway. Your game is probably going to be seen on Twitch and YouTube before it's played by somebody. So if you can make it look awesome, if you can make it look cool enough to draw players in, whether it be with cool explosions or other stuff, you should definitely be aiming for that kind of stuff. And with that, I think that's everything I want to say about explosions for now. So we can kick it over to questions and all that good stuff.
Okay, can you hear us?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and let's check to see if we have any.
Yeah, there is one.
Oh, I should probably go back to me.
Yeah.
I am screen sharing.
Yeah.
Why do internet people get preference on questions? They're not even here.
Okay. All right. Does anybody have any questions? Eric?
Stole the microphone. Here. You said, what's it called? Pause, like freezing the action or freezing
Hit freeze.
the hit freeze.
Yeah.
What exactly does that mean? Like, I don't understand.
Okay. Let's. I wonder if I can. It's kind of hard to show with like the frame rate of Google Hangouts. I'm gonna go back to screen share real quick. I'm gonna try to find a moment where it happens. I keep skipping over when the player takes damage. Okay, I know I take damage in the boss. Let's just go to the boss. Boss fight. Okay. I'm gonna step through this because okay, so this bullet, make it bigger. This bullet right here is gonna hit the orb. And when it does, so far for these 2 frames, the players stopped moving, and like everything stopped moving, and like the screen turned red, and now there's like these sparks going off. More sparks. Gameplay is still totally frozen. And then after stuff calms down, it resumes. So does that make sense?
Okay, so like movement stops, but like the animations keep going,
Yeah, pretty much.
and it's not.
Kind of like indicating that you're taking damage.
Yes.
But it's not like for the whole duration of the explosion either. It's just
Right.
Like, pause at the
It
beginning.
resumes quicker than the explosion finishes. Or like, yeah.
Super Mario Brothers used for that phase change, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
When you got the mushroom or whatever.
And when you lose the mushroom.
Yeah.
So change something. Devil May Cry does a hit freeze when the player hits certain enemies. I think it's based off damage. I think where the more damage you do, the longer the hit freeze is.
Yeah, beat 'em ups are. Devil May Cry is a great example of that.
have a question. So you don't have to go super in depth, but what's kind of the process you use to program some of the particle effects in your engine?
So Otter has. Okay, I won't go super in depth. I was like going to open Visual Studio. Bad idea. Otter has a class called Particle, and it sort of came from a process that I kept using over and over again, which is just like I have like basically like a game object that has a bunch of properties. Like it has like speed and direction and like lifespan, which is like how long before it gets removed, and then like color, and it has like just like a whole bunch of stuff, and it has like initial values and final values. So like an easy particle might be like spawn this particle, give it an initial speed of 5 and a final speed of 0, and then set its lifespan to like 30 frames. So then that'll just quickly make this little particle that will shoot off, slow down as it gets to the end of its life, and then vanish after 30 frames. So yeah, it's just kind of like a little toolkit that I have built into my framework, if that makes sense.
Cool. Awesome.
There's a tweet. Question. I have a question. Go ahead. All right.
Sorry. What made you choose to make your own framework instead of using one of the existing kind of 2D game frameworks?
Because I'm an idiot. So I used to use Multimedia Fusion, if anyone knows what that is. I used to use GameMaker, and then I used Flashpunk, and then I was like, I really like the design of Flashpunk, but there's like almost nothing out there like it. And I tried a whole bunch of stuff like Unity, and like Monogame, that kind of stuff, and I don't know. I just didn't really like their design. It was like the API or whatever. So one day I was like, oh, I wonder if I can just take Flashpunk and port it to like a renderer. So I found this thing called SFML, which is like, it's like this rendering library thing that's kind of like SDL. I think it runs on OpenGL. So I found like some .NET bindings for it, like C#. So I just ported Flashpunk to C#, and then I expanded it from there. And eventually that became like my framework.
Okay, so this is from Mild Mojo. He says, do you have to deal with visual scaling artifacts when scaling explosion particles and shockwave sprites so much?
It depends on the sprite. Yeah, if you look at stuff super closely, frame by frame, like if a thing is scaled up by 2x, you might see some artifacts on the more detailed stuff. I think the cool thing about the shockwaves and the glow is that they're kind of blurry. Like they're not like the sharpest designed things, so you can kind of just scale those up like crazy. And also I try to start with big assets and then scale them down as necessary. So when I draw my assets, I usually make them at double the size I imagine I'll need them to be. So just in case I need to make them bigger later, I can go back to my source files and just export those at like 1x instead of 0.5. But yeah, usually when stuff is happening so fast, it's super hard to notice visual artifacts.
And we have another question from Ben Wiley 4000. He says, did you study any particular resources in learning about explosion theory, or did you just watch things / play things?
Explosion theory, that sounds awesome. I think it's just from a lot of playing and also a lot of studying. For a while, like when I was like a teenager making games, I was basically just making fan games. So I would make like Kirby fan games and Mega Man fan games and whatever. So I would actually like try to really study why, like when I made a game and it felt awful, I would try to study why it did versus the original source games. Like Kirby has a lot of subtle stuff going on that's insane. Like when you get a power up, it freezes the gameplay, it darkens the screen, it plays all these particle effects, Kirby animates, all this kind of stuff. And And I feel like it's kind of stuff that you don't notice unless you really sit down and study footage of it. So yeah, a lot of playing, a lot of studying, a lot of like, if I see a cool effect, I'm like, this feels really good, then I'll record it and look at it frame by frame and see what exactly it is they're doing. Because, you know, if you do something right, the player won't really notice what's going on.
And there's another one from Studio Paradolia. Can you speak about your influences in your games for particle effects? You mentioned SF4 and Kirby earlier. Are there any else?
I guess like Metal Slug kind of falls into there. Man, I don't know. It's kind of tough, actually. I can't really think of many, like, I guess like commercial games or anything that I've played that kind of has like the same like puffy particle kind of thing. I guess like definitely like Konjax games like Night to Love and like Legend of Princess have a lot of like puffy explosions, which are kind of similar. Yeah, I'm really bad at the influences question usually. I can't think of stuff.
Okay, that's it.
Do you have a number of frame counts for all your explosion animations? Say for the boss one, it looks intense. How many frames do you have in that one?
So are you talking about like
Frame counts like total for
the whole thing start to finish?
Yeah. Well, for me as an artist, I usually do just frame by frame images.
Mhm.
So I guess I don't know what your process is.
Okay, so I'll switch to screen mode real quick. So my explosions they're constructed from a bunch of particles, and actually I have a different slide for that way up here. So all of my explosions are just built off of these particles that are animated frame by frame on sprite sheets. So I think the longest one I have is this guy, which is like 5, 10, 14, like almost 15 frames. And then these ones are smaller. This guy's probably like 7 or 8. This one is 4. And then we have a guy 6 down here. So these are just all used like over and over again for different explosions. So like a total frame count is kind of tough because it's kind of like I'm reusing these particles a lot. If that makes sense.
So it's randomized. Is that what you said?
Yeah. It's driven by the engine mostly.
All right. Cool. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
It's called Otter.
Yeah.
Is that on the internet that I can like go and read your explosion particle stuff if I wanted?
Yeah. It's otter2d.com. The whole thing is open source, so you can look at everything, do whatever you want with it.
Sweet.
I guess it's kind of a two-parter, unrelated to each other. Otter C#, right?
Yes.
Okay. Second question:
That was the easy
how
one.
much of your explosions are randomized, and how much of them are kind of like that controlled, like designed explosion? What would you say the ratio is, like for like the bomb, for example?
I think overall for this game, a lot of it is on the control side. Like a lot of the like when I spawn stuff, it's usually like when I drop a bunch of particles in, they're usually evenly distributed in a circle around the center, which is pretty controlled to me. The long beams that are around the outside, those are totally randomized. They'll be in totally random positions every time, but the same distance away. Like I was saying, for like the enemy explosion, certain aspects of it are very random. Like the little debris pops that are happening in the background, those are randomized from the center of the explosion to a certain radius, and they're just picking any position that is valid inside that circle, and then spawning with a random startup time. So like one could spawn 30 frames after the initial burst, or another one could spawn 10 frames after the initial burst. I'm trying to think of like, I think for the bomb is a little bit more chaotic. Like the smoke can be everywhere, but but the core of that explosion is still like a circle.
There's two more.
No. Online questions.
Online questions.
Online.
Okay,
Internet.
so Ben Wiley 4000 again. Can you
Uh-oh.
elaborate a bit about how Street Fighter does hit freeze well versus Wind Waker?
Okay, so I think the main difference is like when you're playing Street Fighter and you throw let's say you throw a roundhouse, which is like a heavy kick, like usually like the strongest, slowest attack any character has, and you whiff it, the animation just goes like it'll just go through and nothing will really happen. There's no weight, and so if you throw a roundhouse and your opponent blocks it, you can really feel the weight of that. Like they kind of Street Fighter doesn't actually like, I don't think they actually stop the game entirely. I think they slow it down, but it'll slow down. It'll play like this like blue, and this is Street Fighter 4 I'm talking about. It'll play like this like blue spark animation that comes out of the point of contact, and you can feel that the game has like kind of slowed down a little bit. And same thing when you're doing like, if you're just playing a character, you're just playing a game and you are throwing out jabs like crazy, like you can feel the difference in the rate of like throwing jabs out without hitting your opponent versus hitting your opponent. When you hit your opponent with the jabs, it's much slower because every hit has that slight delay of the impact just to give that hit more weight to it. So yeah, just go into training mode and look at it. And also like, so when you do like an ultra combo or something, like if you like Ryu or Sakura have like the ultra combo Hadoukens that hit multiple times, each hit freezes because like Sakura's ultra hits 5 times for her fireball. If the game didn't freeze, the fireball would just go like, and it just hit 5 times right away. And then it would just be like, okay. But every hit freezes, and like when the game freezes, the opponent that's taking the hit, their model will shake left and right for the freeze, and then after like I don't know what the timing is exactly, but after a short time, then the next hit happens, and the same thing happens, and it does that 5 times. So it just makes that fireball feel that much more like meaty, kind of in a way. And you can see this especially like if you want to see the most extreme example is when you get an ultra combo KO. With one of those fireballs, the game slows down super like super much. It slows down a lot, and then it plays the whole like crazy background particle effect or like screen animation of like the fire coming out of the background, and then the game slows down, and then every hit is just so intense. When they get KO'd, you can really feel it there. Hope that makes sense.
And then we have another from Studio Paradolia. What has your experience been streaming your development, and what are your motivations for it?
Streaming development has been a lot of fun. I highly recommend it. My motivation is that I went from living in a house full of people to just kind of being by myself a lot now. So like I live with my girlfriend, but she works during the day, and I'm indie game developer, so that means I stay home and play on my computer all day. So streaming is kind of like this way for me to interact with people, and it also helps me focus a lot because, as soon as I push that start streaming button, I'm not going to go like stream myself browsing Facebook. I'm going to stream myself making my game. It's kind of like it's kind of like a lessened effect of a game jam, right? Like game jams are amazing because it's like, at least for me, they make me focus a lot. So streaming is kind of like a slightly subdued game jam feeling where I can hit start streaming for like, 4 hours or so. I'm not working super fast, but it's still 4 hours of butt and chair time. Like I have my code window open, I have my art window open, I'm doing work, even if it's not at like a blazing speed.
When you're streaming like that, and does it make it hard to like stop and think about the code? Like if it's a really intense problem, like can you do that while you're streaming, or does that bother you?
Yeah, so far streaming, I've only tackled like kind of like fluffy stuff. Like for Sky Sisters last week, I just worked on the backgrounds for the game, and that just involved like redoing some artwork and programming and like the new art assets behavior into the game. Like there was one part, like the most intense part so far of streaming has been like I was trying to figure out the math of like spawning stuff in the right place, like depending on like a wind direction. And so like I opened up like Photoshop and started drawing like vectors and stuff and shapes, and then like the chat was trying to like figure out the math, like the vector math of this thing. And I'm trying to figure it out. And so it's kind of like this like collaborative, it's like a cool problem. If you have a cool problem to solve and you have like a few people in the chat room that are also game developers, then it's like everybody starts trying to solve this problem, and it's a lot of fun. But I haven't done anything like, oh, I need to fix a bug in the rendering system or something. I don't think that's really appropriate for streaming, because it is kind of hard to just sit down and be like, okay, I need to sit down with paper and like, or whatever, or I need to try like 100 different things to fix this. So that, yeah, there are things appropriate for game dev streams and things that are not, I think.
Okay, so like stuff you can picture in your mind and you know where you're going, kind of.
Yeah, I think whenever I stream, I try to have like some easy tasks to do first, and that will maybe lead into some harder ones. And usually after like the first hour, I'm more ready to try to tackle like a hard task. But I don't think I've done anything super crazy hardcore yet on the stream, like as far as like debugging or programming goes.
Cool. Anyone else?
So I've noticed that you work on a lot of your projects solo. Do you have opinions on why you prefer that, or like are you working with anybody else on your current project, or is it just all you?
Yes, opinions. That's I don't really know. It just sort of, I think I work solo because I like having my hands in all the pies or whatever, right? Like I like doing every aspect of game development. I like programming, I like art, and I even like doing music, but I'm like so terrible at that I usually get somebody else to help me with that. And I don't know, for Snapshot, I worked on a team, and that was fine. But it definitely, for me, was a way different world, because working with a team, I sort of always had this analogy in my head of like a vehicle, like where it's like working solo is like you're riding a motorcycle and you can just go wherever you want. You can turn on a dime. Like if tomorrow I woke up and I was like, you know what, Super Sky Sisters is going to be an RTS game now, then I would only be affecting me. I wouldn't be like turning to a team of like 3 people and being like, hey guys, I totally changed the game. Hope that's cool with you. Hope you're not mad. Because like when you're working with a team, it's a lot more compromise. It's a lot more discussions about things. A lot more like making sure everyone's on the same page. So you run the risk of maybe going a little bit slower with team development, but also faster if you're managed well. I don't know. It's super complicated in my brain, I think. If I found more people that I'm like totally in tune with to work with, then I would have no objections to it. It's just that usually I just end up working solo because I just can work on all aspects of the game.
Popular. So this is from Mild Mojo. What microphone do you use, and have you ever used it to record explosions?
This is an AT2020 Plus. I got it on super sale on Amazon like a year ago. It's pretty sweet. It's a USB, or no, yeah, it's AT2020 USB Plus, because this same company makes XLR microphones. So unless you have like a mixing board, you can't plug this into your computer. I actually haven't used it to record any sound effects now, and I probably should. You can like, I know a lot of people that just do mouth noises for their games. They do mouth noises and they bring it into like audio editing software and kind of clean it up and make it sound cooler.
So we have a lot of first timers who are attending game jams, and we always have like a couple of words of advice that we give them when tackling their first jam. And so just do you have any words of advice for somebody doing a game jam for the first time?
For the first time, I think if you're doing it for the very first time, your goal should. I don't think your goal should be to make a game. I think your goal should be to learn about like how to make games. Like, I guess it depends on where they're coming from. If they're a first time game jammer but they're already a game developer, then my advice is to choose one of two goals. One goal can be make a finished game, and the other goal can be learn a specific thing that you've been waiting to learn for whatever reason. And I don't think I think it's very hard to make both of those goals work together. Because to finish a game, to make a cool finished game, I think you need to be working in something that you're very comfortable with, that you know in and out, like, that like you won't get caught up in any weird technical issues or design issues. But if your goal is to learn a thing, you can be like, and this is how I was using game jams for a while, is like, when I first learned Flashpunk, I was like, how can I learn Flashpunk? I'm going to do a weekly game jam where I have to work in Flashpunk. We did 2-hour jams where it was like we would pick a random page from the Perry Fellow Bible Ship or whatever it's called comic book. We would pick a random page, and then it was like me and like 7 or 8 other people pick a random page and then leave for 2 hours, come back with something that's inspired by that page. So my goal was always to make something in Flashpunk. And every time I did that, I would learn a new thing. Like, oh, how can I make like a level? How can I load it? Okay, I'll do this game jam. I'll just do that. I'll just try to figure out how to make a level and load it. It's like, oh, how can I do like, I don't know, something as simple as like making animated sprites. Like, how can I make cool animated sprites in Flashpunk? Okay, a 2-hour game jam and figure it out. So yeah, my advice is either, if you're experienced game dev, if you're gonna make a game, use stuff that you're super, super comfortable with. And if you don't want to do that, if you want to learn a thing, then just focus on learning a thing. It's very, very difficult to make both of those work together, finishing a game and learning a new thing.
So I have one last question. Eric and I right here, we're Two Scoop Games, and so we always ask, what's your favorite ice cream?
Okay, let's see. Like, are we talking like hard ice cream? Like, because you're scoops, right? So it has to be hard ice cream. It's not soft serve, I'm guessing. I think I'm gonna go with cotton candy. Ooh. Like whenever a place has cotton candy ice cream, I'm all over it. Especially if it's like blue and pink. Have you ever seen that stuff? Looks amazing.
Yeah. That's awesome. So thank you so much for talking with us. I really appreciate it. Yeah. Is there anything else that you'd like to plug or anything? Do you want to bring up that slide again with your
sure,
with all your info? And yeah, are you gonna post your slides online anywhere where we can take a look?
Yeah, I want to post the slides, and as well as like, let's see, I'm trying to think. I'm looking at these video files so there's 4 video files. There's like footage from the game, there's the boss fight, and then there's also like the 2 explosions. I think I want to upload all of those as well, just so people have the videos that they can step through frame by frame themselves if they want to. And this PowerPoint is full of little animations. So yeah, I will post them eventually, probably just on my site. Like my blog is like kpulv.com/blog. It'll probably be up there in a couple days. I think the only thing I want to plug is, I guess, my Twitch stream now. It's twitch.tv/kpulv. I do dev streams now, and it's fun. And if you're a developer or whatever, come hang out. It's kind of like internet co-working. It's kind of fun. So yeah, I think that's it. And then Super Sky Sisters will be out eventually, sometime, somewhere. I'm sure when I have more of a plan, I will let everybody know.
Awesome. Thank you so much for talking with us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Cool. Do you have any questions for us?
Yeah, how's the game dev scene out there? You mentioned a little bit. It's like it looks like it's pretty strong.
Yeah. So we just got our own space, which is really
Yeah.
fun, and so we've been enjoying that for what, like 2.5 months now, something like that. Beginning of January, and yeah, so we're having like a grand opening party on the 27th.
Oh, cool.
That's going to be really fun. We have 17 members right now. All of our events are free, but if you want to use the space as your like office, we charge for that just to cover the cost of rent and everything. And so we have more members than we were expecting starting out.
Yeah, 17 that's really high for like just starting out. Like it's pretty impressive actually.
And
34
yeah,
jam attendees.
yeah, we had 34 people for Global Game Jam, which was really cool. That was the
Nice.
biggest attendance we've had. And the last 2 jams that we've done, Loom Dare 34, we had 10 games, and Global Game Jam, we had like 9 or 10 games made. So that was really cool.
Nice.
And we're getting people to do game jams as much as possible.
Mhm.
So I guess we're trying to attract more artists and musicians and story people.
Sure.
Because anytime that you have like a meetup or anything like that, it usually attracts more techie people and more programmers.
Yeah.
So I mean, you obviously do everything. So it's
try.
When we're trying to form more little teams. We have a couple of studios that have come up through our group, and so like Two Scoop Games, Roaring Cat Games, and so we've got and then a new one. Spacetronaut.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
Oh, cool.
And we have our first person who is moving from somewhere other than Kentucky to move to Kentucky mostly for the game dev scene, which is pretty cool.
Wow.
So
That's pretty
nice for
big
us.
achievement unlocked, I think.
Yeah. So yeah, it's cool. I mean, it probably sounds weird that people are making games in Kentucky, but we're we're trying to kind of change that idea that people have. Louisville's a really cool place. So
That's your shtick, right? It's like nobody ever thought games would be made in Kentucky, but now they are.
Yeah. We had so I'll come back over here for a second. Eric and I, we've been working on Eric's game engine, Splat.js. It's a JavaScript game engine that runs. You make games that run in the browser, and you can export to different platforms and stuff. But somebody said we have some other people that don't know what to use for a game jam, so we recommend ours sometimes, and they'll use it. And somebody said I used y'all's game engine, and so we were thinking like. We're in Kentucky, so maybe we should make that the tagline. It's like Splat. It's y'all's game engine. It's an engine for the people. So that's kind of fun. And why did you choose to make your own game engine?
Because I'm dissatisfied with everything all the time.
Yeah.
So
that's like pretty much the creative mind, right? It's constantly being dissatisfied with everything.
So I thought it would be cool for you to see someone else who's who decided to do that on their own too, because it's a crazy journey, but it's there's some really nice parts to it. So I'm writing tutorials and documentation and stuff for the engine right now, and that's a lot of work. But it really pays off when somebody goes through the tutorial and is actually able to make something for the first time. So it's really fun.
Yeah, it's like I'm always like kind of like. We have like an Otter Slack channel that people come into and they start using it, and like I'm always like, wow, cool, somebody else is using it. But also like in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, it's really terrifying if somebody else is using it. Like I hope nothing goes wrong for them.
Yeah. What platforms can you target with Otter so far?
You can do I mean the easiest one is Windows. There have been people that compiled it on Mac. There was one person that I know of that got something running on Linux, but it's C#, so you can all the libraries that it uses are C based. So if you run it through Monogame and compile all the C libraries for Mac, it's totally usable. It's just that personally I work on Windows all the time, so I don't know anything about making anything for anything else. So it's kind of up to the people using the game engine.
Cool.
There was one more question that I missed.
Do you have time for one more online question?
Well, also, Ben Wiley said that you forgot his studio, said Yeti.
Oh, yeah, another new
Yeah.
studio.
Oh, nice.
Did you get Rex's? Are you going by Hydra Chicken?
Is that official yet? Sweet.
Tentatively Hydra Chicken.
Hydra Chicken.
Yes.
Hydra Chicken.
Yeah, you got to check out Hydra Chicken. Was it Ludum Dare 34? Yeah. It's the only game that has rap capella as the background.
Whoa.
It's awesome.
Yeah, that sounds pretty sick.
So Studio Paradolia said, can you speak about your background in art, music, and programming, and was everything self-taught?
Oh, yeah. It's let's see. They can still see me, right? Are we still on the internet?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. I started making games when I was super young. Like, I think when I was like 11 or 12, I got a copy of Click and Play, and I just made garbage with it all the time. I couldn't save because I had the trial version, so I just make a new game every week, play it, and then erase it forever. It was kind of nice. It was kind of neat exercise, and not being attached to your work, right? I went to Clarkson University, which is a little engineering school in like the North Country of New York State, like near the border of Canada, in Potsdam, New York. And I did have some classes in like programming and stuff, and I did have some art classes. Music, I have no training, and that's why my songs are not good. For programming, I'd say I'm mostly self-taught. Like, college classes were kind of weird for me because it was like, here's how to let's make a cash register program, and I'm like, okay, what? And maybe there was a program like, let's make an employee database thing, and that doesn't teach you anything about making games. A lot of my programming came from just doing GameMaker. Like, I started using GML, and then eventually started using ActionScript, and then now I'm using C#. It's kind of like, as my comfort level with programming grows, like I can just start branching off to any programming language because they're more or less all similar, except when you get into like the crazy functional ones. For art, yeah, I'm just all like, I just sort of make what I like, and I just try to draw inspiration from stuff that I like, and I don't really think I have any like training in art. I'm mostly self-taught there.
Awesome. Yeah, that was a good question.
Yeah, it was.
Did you do the music for Offspring Fling?
No, that was Alakaloka.
That's right. Yeah.
A super talented musician or
That's
composer or whatever. He knocked it out of the park with Offspring Fling's soundtrack.
It was really good. Cool. Well, awesome. I could probably ask you 100 more questions, but
I don't know. I got time for maybe 95.
So, what advice would you have for us with trying to build a community like around Warp Zone and around like, I guess our mission is to try to promote game development as a viable career, something where you can actually do that for a living and get paid enough to live on. And so we want to show people here that you can do that. You don't have to move somewhere else. You can do that right here in Louisville. And we have a couple of people who are making that happen with various levels of struggle, but they're making it happen. And it's something that a lot of us aspire to. So what kind of advice would you have for helping the community grow? And
it sounds like y'all are doing like a really good job already. Like having a space. Okay, so like I moved to Denver from Phoenix like this year, and Phoenix. It sounds like your community is kind of similar to Phoenix's, but Phoenix for whatever reason just like could not really get well organized. They like there was a co-working space for a while, and then like they couldn't find a good space for it. They couldn't find a good location because everyone was like scattered throughout the city, so they couldn't find like a central location for everybody. So that like didn't work out. they try to do like events. There's like a group in Phoenix that tries to do like they're doing like promotional stuff. They get the city involved. So like some of the cool things that this group does in Phoenix is that they get the actual like government involved with it. Like at Global Game Jam, they had like the mayor of Phoenix there, and because it was like, hey, Mayor of Phoenix, look at this like new media stuff going on in your city. This is super cool, isn't it? And he's like, yeah, this is pretty cool. I have no idea what's going on, but I trust you. That's super cool. And if it's gonna make Phoenix look good, like on a national level, then I'm all for it. You know, like, so if you can somehow get like somebody from like an official branch of government involved in your stuff, like, that is like a huge help. I mean, kind of always making it like, as a community, you can do things like in your games, you can be like, hey, check out other games from my city. Check out other games from my co-working space, like in your game. You can just have like, you know, you can just put in your game, like, this game was made in like Warp Zone, and here's other games made in Warp Zone, cross promotion stuff like that happened in like the Flash community a lot. Like a lot of groups would make games together and they would cross promote their games. Like, because the hope is that if like you're basically increasing your odds of like, if one of you guys has like an amazing game that takes off and there's a section in that game that's like, check out other cool games, maybe that person can like directly bring other people up with them. And that's sort of the whole goal of a community is, right? It's like, increasing the odds of somebody being super successful so that when they are successful, they can, you know, extend their hand and start bringing other people with them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. That's some stuff that we're kind of already trying to do. The cross promotion stuff is something that we could probably be better about. So that's a cool thing. But one thing that we're trying to do some planning on right now is something that we're kind of tentatively calling the Bluegrass Bundle. And
Yeah.
So we want to try to have a bunch of games created here locally and put it out probably on itch.io and you know, promote our, you know, the Kentucky Fried Pixels is the other channel. Okay, that got I was skeptical, but it got more of a laugh from you, so I think it might be a good choice.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, we're right by Colonel Sanders' grave, so it makes sense.
Okay, I don't know if you want to like, you know, start with that, but
So yeah, there was one other thing that I was thinking about asking about. So I watched I think it was a TED Talk that you did.
whoa,
About-
really?
Yeah. You
That's so
talked
long ago.
about about like basically sponsored Flash games,
Mhm.
and you had I think it was a Ludum Dare game that you were able to get on a sponsored Flash site.
It was actually a Global Game Jam game.
Oh, Game Jam. Okay.
Yeah, from 2010, I think.
So I know that you're doing C# stuff that mostly runs on PC right now. So, but do you have any insight into if teams were making web games that were like HTML5 games like we're doing, are there any good resources for getting sponsorships or getting your game on any sites like there were for the Flash community? Because I haven't really seen anything great out there.
Yeah, so that talk was before like iPhones and stuff.
Yeah.
Kind of that weird thing. So kind of like what happened is that like the whole like Flash game community, not like the whole, but like, so like, because Flash games were like, sponsors wanted stuff that mobile games have now. Like my story was weird because the game Depict 1 was not a typical Flash game. It was like this little experience of like a little half-hour experience game. It wasn't like the Flash game formula was like, here's a game that has like 50 levels of some sort of mechanic. You can buy upgrades, and it just kept evolving from there. Like this whole like upgrade, like play game, buy upgrade, play game, buy upgrade loop that mobile eventually, you know, capitalized on and then took even further. So the demand for browser Flash games is way down from back then. But yeah, like HTML5, I'm totally not sure what like the HTML5 market is looking like, because I've been pretty far removed from it for a number of years now. If you have like a Flash game that's cool, I think you can still directly approach sites like Newgrounds and Congregate and Armor Games, and a handful of others that I can't think of right now. There are still people that are playing games in the browser that are Flash, and especially HTML5 now. I'm just not sure if the same sort of numbers exist. Like Depict One was like, I forget how much it was. It was like 12,000 or something like that, like $15,000 for the sponsorship. And I don't think those numbers really exist anymore, unfortunately, just because mobile kind of cannibalized it.
So speaking of mobile, do you have was it a conscious decision for you not to go with making any mobile games? Or I mean, most of the stuff that I've seen has been stuff that you play on the PC, more traditional, like pay for the game and then you own the game. And I really like that model too, but people are always interested in trying to make something that that's portable, you could show to people on your phones and all that stuff. And so we're kind of keep going back and forth. So what made you make that decision?
After Offspring Fling came out, that's where I began my journey of what do I do next? And that journey is still going on 4 years later. Whoops. So one of my experiments was okay, I'm going to try to make something on mobile on my iPad in Flash using Stage 3D or whatever. And what I found was that I just do not like touchscreens. That's pretty much what it is. I don't like touchscreens. I don't like playing games with touchscreens. I don't like how you when you're playing a game with touchscreen, you're inherently just covering up some percentage of the screen with your input. And I don't like the way it feels. I don't like it's just a personal thing for me. It's I don't think any of the games that I want to make are gonna work on mobile. And I've had a lot of people email me hey, I can port blah 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 to mobile. It will be like this with touchscreen controls. And I'm no, please don't do that, because I want the game to feel good, and it doesn't feel good when you play it on the touchscreen with fake buttons. The little. And for some people, most people don't mind that, and that's totally cool. But it's just for me personally, I just don't like touchscreens. I don't like mobile games in general, so I just kind of don't put any eggs into that basket.
Cool. So do you design stuff with a controller in mind, or do you usually do keyboard?
I kind of both. I try to. So Sky Sisters is mostly controller in mind, because it was a game made for an event. When I lived in Phoenix, we used to have these events called Indie Amigos, and it would be this little. We basically take over a barcade that was in the area with indie games that are made locally.
Cool.
And so I was it's going to be this event. So I want to make a 2-player game. So Sky Sisters actually came out of a game jam, where the theme was connections. So I want to make a 2-player game where the 2 players are literally connected. So I made it with the event in mind, and it's super so when you're getting people to play your game at an event, a controller is way more approachable than a keyboard and mouse. Because especially if you have your laptop or whatever, it's yeah, come up to my laptop and start typing on it. Most people will be more resistant to that versus them walking by and then you just hand them a controller and be yo, check this out. Especially Sky Sisters was really funny to demo, because if 2 people that didn't know each other played it, or if 2 people that know each other very well played it, my favorite was when a father and son played it together, and it was just super funny to watch them come up with strategies and stuff, and I don't know, just seeing 2 people play the game together and have a good time was super rewarding. So yeah, controller for this game. I do have another prototype that's keyboard and mouse, and I think if I do controller input for it, it'll be you basically just control the cursor with your controller, and I'll try to make shortcut buttons for the actions on the controller and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm perfectly between controller and keyboard and mouse, I guess.
Anybody have anything else? No more internet questions.
No more internet questions. No.
Rip internet.
Okay, well, thanks again, and thanks for doing the overtime on the questions. I appreciate it.
No problemo. I got nowhere to be tonight.
Well, cool. Well, thank you so much, and I'll make sure that as soon as you post your slideshow and the other information and the videos and everything, I'll get that out to everybody who is here and post it on the YouTube description as well.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I should do that like right now then.
Sure. I mean, as soon as you get it, just tweet me. Okay,
Yep.
cool. Thank you.
Will do.
Bye.
Bye.
So real quick, I just want to plug our grand opening for Warp Zone Louisville. It's on February 27th, and so if you're in the area, if anybody's watching that's in the area,
I don't think I can make it. Sorry.
that's okay. Yeah, so we're gonna have locally made games, tournaments, prizes, drinks, cookies. It's gonna be really fun, and we're currently inviting tons of people, and we have a meetup page where you could sign up. The easiest way to find it would be to check out LouisvilleMakesGames.org or Lou Makes Games on Twitter, and that's it. That's the big thing. And then after that, we're going to be at the Arcade Expo, Louisville Arcade Expo, showing off many of the same games. And then after that, we're going to be doing Ludum Dare, which is April 15th, the weekend of tax day weekend. So
Perfect.
Yeah. So those are our next three big events. So if anybody's watching who's in the area, come check us out. And everything you can find it all at LouisvilleMakesGames.org. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.